Ever wonder why people love vampires but hate mosquitoes? Hello, and welcome to another episode of For the Love of Bugs. In our last episode, we looked at endosymbionts and parasites, and how parasites may not always be the worst. Speaking of parasites and the worst, let's talk about mosquitoes. Pretty much everybody watching this video has had, let's just call it, negative experiences with mosquitoes before. They're one of the most common, if not the most common, blood-feeding animal in the world. Their feeding has a tendency to leave red, itchy bumps on your skin, and the act of feeding itself has the tendency to transmit a number of diseases, some of which can be deadly, if not debilitating. Then there's their wings. Their wings, as they're flying, produce a really high-pitched whine, which when you stack it up next to everything else, maybe doesn't seem like such a bad thing, until they're constantly making that whine right in your ear and they won't leave you alone. So it's no small surprise, then, that humans have been waging nothing short of a war against mosquitoes for the last 100 or so years. In this war, mosquitoes have shown themselves to be quite capable opponents. Different species of mosquitoes have demonstrated regional to widespread resistance to many of the chemicals that we have used as weapons against them. This includes things like DDT and pyrethroids, and in some cases even seems to include neonicotinoids that weren't even applied to them directly but were used on surrounding fields. But what if we did have a weapon that was finally capable of defeating them? What if we had some way of causing mosquitoes to finally go extinct? What would happen then? And it isn't really a hard thing to find a bright side to mosquitoes going extinct. They are, after all, bloodsuckers. In fact, it's this process of feeding on your blood that causes them to be such big issues for people. It's because in order to feed on your blood, the first thing they have to do is they have to inject their saliva into your bloodstream. Their saliva includes anticoagulants that prevent your blood from clotting and allow them to feed for longer periods of time. Their saliva isn't just good for anticoagulants, though. There's a variety of viruses and parasites that also hitch a ride in their saliva and transmit that way from host to host. These things can be things like malaria and yellow fever and Zika. These diseases have been some of the most deadly diseases in human history, and they're a big part of the reason why some estimates place mosquitoes as being indirectly responsible for more human deaths than just about any other animal. But mosquitoes aren't just simply rampaging vampires. Indeed, for every mosquito that you see feeding on blood, there's another one that never does. The blood feeding itself is actually a reproductive strategy, meant to acquire enough protein in order to build eggs with. And so female mosquitoes will only feed on blood when they're getting ready to lay eggs. And male mosquitoes never even feed on blood because they don't make eggs. So if mosquitoes feed on nectar, does that then make them pollinators? If so, how important of pollinators are they? What flowers do they pollinate? We don't really know the answers to most of these questions. Aside from a couple of flowers that we do have a fair understanding of, yes, mosquitoes go to these, and yes, they are important pollinators, we don't really have a whole lot of information out there for what flowers mosquitoes are visiting, and whether they're even transferring pollen from one flower to the next. Now, this may surprise some of you, but adult mosquitoes are not exactly uncommon insects. Add to this the fact that they're also not the fastest flying insect out there, nor are they especially good at flying, especially when they're loaded up with a fresh meal of blood, means that adult mosquitoes tend to be pretty easy pickings for a lot of different types of predators. Now, it is true that predators that feed on mosquitoes don't tend to be specialists. They tend to be generalists that feed on a pretty wide variety of flying insects. But there are certain cases, especially the case of the house martin over in Europe, where lower numbers of adult mosquitoes has actually been correlated with lower numbers of eggs in the nest. So does this then mean that mosquitoes going extinct would cause a ripple extinction pattern where their predators would then go extinct as well? Potentially yes, but also potentially no. To be able to really understand this, we need to have a much better understanding of seasonal feeding patterns so that we can really get to the heart of, is this something that predators need? Or will they engage in sort of a switching on over to a different food source to be able to sustain their population? And adult mosquitoes aren't the only important food source. Unlike most other aquatic invertebrates, mosquito larvae don't actually possess any gills with which to exchange oxygen with water directly. Instead, they basically use an adaptation of a snorkel. This means that in order to be able to breathe, they need to be up at the surface. And it's this tendency to be in the open, exposed areas that makes them such an important food source for a wide variety of aquatic animals, including other insects, in fact, sometimes even other mosquito larvae, reptiles, amphibians, and fish. The mosquito fish alone has been shown to consume up to 167% of its body mass in mosquito larvae per day. Now, some people have certainly argued that mosquito larvae are not the only aquatic fly larvae, and that in the absence of mosquito larvae, you would have something else like midge larvae that would end up taking over that role, and predators could just simply switch on over to them. But that sort of glosses over the difference in feeding mechanisms and ecological roles that these two types of larvae focus in on. Mosquito larvae, being up at the top, can lead to some very specialized feeding behaviors. Midge larvae, on the other hand, tend to be down in the sediment at the bottom of the body of water. And this would require a different feeding strategy. Now, there are certain aquatic predators that could pretty easily make that switch on over, but there's also some that are so heavily adapted to feeding at the surface that trying to make that switch over, and this is especially the case for mosquito fish, trying to make that switch on over to a bottom-feeding, buried in sediment midge larvae would be very difficult, if not in fact impossible. But mosquito larvae are more than just a tasty snack. In many bodies of water, they're extremely important consumers of bacteria and algae and decaying organic matter. In fact, the presence of mosquitoes can often serve to improve water quality and clarity. Here again, there is always the argument that they are not the only ones doing this, that they are far from the only aquatic invertebrate that is responsible for doing these things, and that's absolutely correct. If mosquitoes would disappear, there are plenty of bodies of water that would have other ways of cleaning themselves up through other organisms. However, it is also quite possible that due to their large numbers and their ability to withstand poor water quality and high water pollution, and their ability to colonize just about any body of water, even if it's just simply a trash can with rainwater in it, make mosquitoes an important link in a chain that might not be as easily replicated as you might otherwise think. So if we had the ability to cause all mosquitoes to go extinct, should we? Should we just kill them all? Well, on one hand, there is absolutely no denying the huge negative impact that they have on humans, contributing to the death and illness of millions of people every single year. On the other hand, whatever positives they bring to the ecosystem tend to be fairly nebulous and poorly researched. And so, an article in the journal Nature asked this question not too long ago. The authors then researched the question, interviewed experts, and ultimately came to the conclusion that whatever positives that mosquitoes have to natural ecosystems are vastly outweighed by the negatives that they have to humans. It is their conclusion that we are more limited by whether we can kill all mosquitoes than whether or not we should. Personally, I'm not in favor of this sort of an argument. The idea that we can tailor ecological communities to suit our needs seems all too much like an ecological game of Jenga, where we're just removing the pieces that we don't want in hopes that the whole thing just doesn't come crashing down on us. It reminds me a lot, actually, of the Biosphere 2 project that we covered in the video linked below. In this project, people tried to tailor their ecological communities to support human inhabitants for the 2-year period in which they were sealed off from the rest of the world. What they ended up with, instead of well-functioning communities, was highly disturbed communities that were extremely susceptible to introduced species and massive atmospheric swings. Applying that sort of an issue onto a global scale really just doesn't seem like the most advisable thing to do, in my opinion. Hey, speaking of atmospheric swings, how about that global climate change? Let's talk about that next.
Alright, that's it for today. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to like, subscribe, and share with your friends, family, nemesis, evil twins, etc. If you have questions or comments or just want to say hi, you can find links to our social media and email in the description below. And remember, alternative viewpoints are welcome, trolls are not. Thank you guys for watching, and until next time, keep your eyes on the little guys.